G'day Internet, my name is Lorenzo Di-Mauro Hayes. The AFL season is underway, which means, as is our little annual tradition in this country, Australia, AFL's rules and the umpiring will be a hot topic of discussion for the next 6 months. And I think we can all agree on one thing: we won't be able to agree. Which is why I have made this video, yes, to rile some people up even more, because today I'm proposing many rule changes that I would make if I was in a position of power at the Australian Football League. I believe that these will be consequential rule changes, as you will see. I am not someone who agrees with the leave the game alone crowd. I couldn't be any more of the opposite opinion. This game needs its rule changes to evolve. The reason why the NFL is the king, other than the fact that American football is a pretty good sport, I mean, it's not that good, it's pretty good, is because the NFL is constantly updating. Super Bowl, catch rule, now we'll allow those diving efforts into the end zone that break the plane and then they lose the ball upon touching the ground. No, that's a touchdown. That's absolutely what it should be. The NFL is very good at this most of the time, the overtime rules and the fumbling the ball through the end zone rules notwithstanding, but for the most part the NFL does a very good job of being ahead of the game and making rule changes when they need to. So I believe the AFL should be going down this route today, and if you're wondering about the number, which is something that always gets discussed, if you weren't happy with Stephen Hawking's 9, I can assure you I'm not proposing 9 rule changes. I'm proposing 18. Why? Because I am 2 times more bold than anyone at AFL House. That's bloody why. I'm going to get straight into it, getting my hands dirty, riling some people up for the benefit of the football community, unlike my former high school principal, who will only get her feet dirty for the school community. Really sends out a strong message that I will be doing all the sacrifices alongside my students for the length of an Instagram reel. Now, I said 18 rule changes. That's not exactly true. I'm doing 16 rule changes and 2 rule tweaks. When I say rule tweaks, I mean things that, as far as I tell, I don't actually need to rewrite the Australian football rulebook to be able, or lawbook, to be able to enact these changes. These 2 are very basic. No warning before 666 and the return of runners at basically any time. I do not understand. It frustrates me every time when there is a warning for 666. Can someone please explain to me why this hasn't been an automatic free kick for the last 5 years? It sort of made sense when the 666 rule was introduced. It's been the best of Steve Hawking's rule changes pretty much, and the only one that's really universally supported. The 666 rule has been good. The warning doesn't make any sense. We don't do it for any other rule. It sort of made sense at the start when it was new, and if it was a deliberate breach, maybe it'd be fair, but if it wasn't a deliberate breach, maybe that'd be too harsh. I don't buy this argument. I believe strongly if there is an infringement for starting positions, a free kick should be awarded to the opposite team immediately. Let's get the game moving. The other one is the runners. I don't believe that reducing the runners has made that big of an impact one way or another. I'm more happy to bring them back basically at any time, ensure that if they get in the way of the ball or the opposition team, that a free kick should be awarded. But other than that, bring back the runners basically any time. The AFL sort of increased that this season, but I would just allow free-for-all as we used to. Right, so they're just 2 sort of minor rule tweaks. Now we're getting to 16 substantial rule changes. Let's begin where all games begin, at the centre bounce. If a ball is bounced and it's not really that particularly fair of a bounce, the umpire will recall it, but we will often lose 2 or 3 seconds off the clock. Perhaps the most substantial example of this that I can remember anyway was when the Crows and the Bulldogs played in Ballarat with teams within a kick of each other. We lost a couple seconds off the clock. Now, it didn't really affect the outcome of that game, but I believe it's fair that no time should have been lost at that situation. So instead, the rule was state that the clock will only restart at a centre bounce when the ball is touched by one of the competing players. This is very similar to basketball, where the clock only restarts when it is touched by someone after who's touched the inbound pass. So I think this is something that makes complete sense. You're not overcomplicating things for the time officials, and we won't lose any time. It's not the most significant rule change, which is why I'm explaining it first, but I do think it will have a positive impact. The running bounce is an interesting rule. It's a fabric of Australian football. It has been for almost, but not entirely, the entire history of the game, and yet we almost never see players penalised for running too far. I wonder if when, as they say, we're going to get chips in the football that will be able to work out whether a mark or someone has run too far, measuring that 15-meter distance. But from my perspective, I think it would be much more easy for the umpires and fairer to make it 12 steps. Now, currently it is 15 meters, not steps. 12 steps I feel is good because it's easy for them to calculate, and also typically it's just a little bit longer than 50 meters. Let's say somewhere between 15 and 20 meters is your typical 12 steps, running at full speed for an Australian football player at the top level. This would be much easier for the umpires. The players would also be able to work out whether they're getting close to that figure and whether they should be bouncing it at this particular point. I say 12 steps. You must not take more than 12 steps before taking a running bounce. If you take a 13th step, you will be penalised running too far. The protected area is something that I know Kane Corns gets particularly angry about, and not for a complete lack of a reason. The only real issue I have with it, to be honest, I mean, you can nitpick with a few different things, but I would just say, back in, I believe it was 2015, it might have been 2016, they lengthened how wide the protected area was from 5 to 10 meters. I'm going to bring that back to 5 meters so that we don't have situations where umpires are going to give away 50-meter penalties for something that's right on that 10-meter area, that's probably a bit more than 10 meters, even though they're not really substantially affecting the player. I feel like 5 meters, we talk about shepherding within 5 meters. That seems like a reasonable area where you can feel pressure on a football field. So I say 5 meters for the protected area rule rather than the current 10. A particular issue that pops up every now and then is players staging for free kicks. This won't solve the problem, but I hope at the very least it sort of starts that way. Now, I am stealing this rule partially from the NFL, which has a rule that says punters cannot simulate, and I'm pretty sure that's true for other special team players, cannot simulate being roughed. As far as I am aware, it's only been penalised one time with this hilarious statement from the referee, and I also think it probably should have been a penalty against the receiving team.
That's a personal foul on the kicker for trying to draw a penalty. Yeah.
But in any case, I'm going to take that rule to say if you stage for a free kick, that should be penalised against you. Will this be umpired very well? Probably not, but I would hope at the very least that if players know that staging for a free kick could very well result in a free kick against them, they may not do it. Do I have that much hope in humanity? No, not really, but one can hope. A particular issue that I get infuriated about is when players drop at the knees to try and get a high contact free kick. They're putting themselves in a little bit of danger here, even though it's more around the neck than, say, contact with the head. You know my thoughts on that particular issue. Watch the concussion in sports videos and that first YouTube show I do. You know what? Watch all of my videos. I put a lot of effort into all of them. More effort into these sort of videos than the shorts, and even more effort into the moment that and the brilliance of videos. At any rate, I have proposed, I sort of came up with this idea of sort of grand final week last year, that a player who drops at their knees, ducks, that sort of thing, would be penalised if, in the view of the umpire, they are not trying to evade a tackle. If they're just there, Jack, to get a free kick out of it, it should be penalised against them. If you are Joel Selwood, you're trying to avoid a tackle, it counts as prior opportunity, which means you have to get the handball a quick way in good time, but you will be allowed to evade a tackle. But if you drop, put yourself in danger for the purpose of getting a free kick, you should be the one that's penalised against. You should be not the one receiving a free kick. Another rule which I do not understand, and out of any of these rules, these are the ones this is the one that I would probably apply immediately, the last disposal rule. It's worked very well in the AFLW, it's worked very well in the SANFL. If you handball or kick the ball out of bounds as the last touch, as opposed to any other form of last touch, a free kick will be awarded. The boundary umpires do a lasso sort of signal to signal that a last disposal free kick has been awarded. This opens up the game right down the middle of the ground, keeps the game away from the boundary line, less stoppages, more action. The SANFL has really benefited from this. It's pretty much well known at this point that they were one of the lowest scoring, or basically the lowest scoring, state league before the introduction of the last disposal rule, whilst now with the last disposal rule at their disposal, the SANFL is now the highest scoring of the state leagues. My only little caveat to this is this rule only applies, like the AFLW, between the arcs. This allows for shots for goal or so that players aren't worried that if they kick and miss everything, that they'll be immediately turning over the ball if all they're doing is have a shot at goal. It also prevents situations like the Caleb Daniel situation from that semi-final against Brisbane, where a hack kick in defence that goes out of bounds, not on the full, not deliberately, should not be awarded a free kick. That was incorrectly awarded a free kick at the time. A 50-metre penalty is a significant penalty, which is why I am proposing for some things, mainly the violation to the stand rule, which is a rule I'm not changing. I'm a big fan of the stand rule and think it should remain in place. Protected area infringements, a penalty of 30 metres should be applied. The reason 30, not 25, is because in levels where we want to maybe not have 50-metre penalties, like in the sample, they only have 25-metre penalties. In this alternate world, instead of they have a choice between 30 and 50 or 15 and 30, as opposed to 25 and 50 and 12 and a half and 25. I guess you could go maybe 15 or 25. But I think a 30-metre penalty, it's a bit more substantive, a nice round number to go with. A 30-metre penalty would also be applied against a player who delayed play by kicking, handballing, or forcing a ball away from a player who had been awarded a free kick, but in the view of the umpire, the player who's knocked that ball away was not aware a free kick had been awarded. I think you can know about that situation, that after the siren kick, that was not given an extra 50 metres for Dion Prestia after the ball was kicked away in that Swans Tigers game. A 30-metre penalty here feels like a more appropriate outcome. It's not completely penalising a player that doesn't know what the situation is, but is also but isn't giving an advantage to time wasting, basically. So a 30-metre penalty, I think, should be awarded in those three circumstances: stand rule violation, protected area violation, and delaying a free kick when you're not aware that a free kick has been awarded. I believe the AFL should get a bit more aggressive on throwing. The current rule is basically you have to intend to throw. If you're making a genuine attempt to dispose of the ball, that is not throwing, even if it does look like a throw. The very last rule in the very first Melbourne rules, the first universal code of Australian football, stated that the football, whilst in play, must under no circumstances be thrown. I would basically carve out a section in the rulebook, given the significance of throwing, and basically copy-paste that into the current rulebook under the banner of throwing the football, and basically put that rule in there to say we're going to be more aggressive on throwing. Even if it looks a bit iffy, now they'll let that go, but I'm putting more emphasis on it has to be a kick or a handball. Even half-hearted throws that are more attempted handballs will be penalised if it is a throw, because the football must under no circumstances be thrown, and that's the way we've thought about it since the late 1850s. That leads in nextly to my next part of the video, holding the ball. The holding the ball rule is important, but it's also very, very complicated, and I want to significantly reduce that as best I can. Now, the holding the ball rule, in my opinion, is actually not too bad for the most part. I believe prior opportunity is an important factor, and I think the game would be worse off if we got rid of it. But we do need to redefine what prior opportunity is. In my view, it should basically be, if you receive a free kick, take a mark, do what I said earlier, duck, lower your body with an attempt to evade a tackle, or, and this is important, you have possessed the football for 1 second or more, basically in a position to prevent players from just knocking it forward. This will replace the current definition of being steady, or what's the exact phrase? I've forgotten it now. I'll put it up on the screen. I know what it is. Steady and balanced, I think it is. Steady and balanced, something like that. That basically replaces that definition. If a player takes possession of the ball and is tackled without prior opportunity, they still have to make a reasonable attempt to dispose of the ball. In my rule, in this situation, if you are capable of disposing of the football within 2 seconds of being tackled, you will have within 4 seconds of being tackled to legally dispose of the ball. So instead of making a genuine attempt in this situation, you do actually have to make a legal disposal. This will hopefully move the game along and make for much less of those awkward situations where everyone's sort of looking around. And the last aspect of this rule is that any incorrect disposal will be penalised as holding the ball, not if you've had prior opportunity and the ball's been knocked out of your grasp. That is fine. And if you are in an attempt to dispose of the football without prior opportunity and you're swung off balance, much like the situation I always come back to is Jerry McGovern in the 2018 Grand Final.
So was Cox. Back to McGovern. Great stuff by Farco. And Connie will get a stoppage.
That will not be penalised on the ball. He didn't have He didn't have prior opportunity. He made a genuine attempt to dispose of the ball and he swung off balance. This should be play on in my world. Now, I do want to add one last caveat. If this seems too heavy on the tackling side of things, my proposal would be to allow only for players who have taken a running bounce, taken a mark, or been awarded a free kick, the ability to do the old school flick pass, which has been banned in the AFL since 1966, literally mid-season 1966, would allow for players to be able to more easily dispose of the football, but by allowing those three caveats, it also means umpires will be able to deduce between flick passes and throws, which would be a lot more difficult without one of those three requirements being in there for a player to commit a flick pass. I wouldn't introduce it straight away, but if it's becoming clear after the first season that my holding the ball rule is too favourable for the tackles, I would consider introducing that in. The deliberate rule is sort of in between what I would do. I wouldn't go back to the old school days where it was almost never paid, and I probably wouldn't go to today where insufficient intent is probably a bit over the top. That's what the last disposal rule will be there for. In my world, the deliberate rule really should be the same for over the behind line and goal line for deliberate rush behind, just as it is for out of bounds. So in my situation, knowing we have the last disposal there for between the arcs, players will be penalised for deliberately rushing the ball beyond 5 metres if they knock that ball through with no pressure around them. And it will be the exact same situation regarding the goal line, the behind line, and the boundary line, which is crucial here, given at the moment the behind line and the goal line is still a bit more of an incentive. There is less penalty, there is less risk there for knocking it through from 8 metres away. That's fine if there's significant pressure, but you wouldn't be able to do that if the ball went the other side of the behind post and over the boundary line. Hang in there, guys, we're 2/3 of the way through. Should Jimmy Webster, John DeGoey, Tom Stewart, Braden Maynard have been sent off after their respective infamous bumps? In my opinion, yes, they absolutely should have been. I do not buy the argument that introducing a red card would make it more complicated for umpires. And the reason why I believe that is because, ironically, this is a time when people who confuse AFL with Australian football and get the incorrect terminology, this time they're actually right, because we don't need to introduce a red card into Australian football. We do need to in the AFL, because the laws of Australian football are already there, very plain and simple, that say what happens, or at least by the AFL standards, what constitutes a yellow, what constitutes a red card. The only problem is that the very first thing the rule says is this doesn't apply for the AFL. So obviously the only thing we really need to do is get rid of that. But I just add one more into this list that would basically say that head-high bumps would be considered a serious reportable offence that would result in players being sent off in that situation for the remainder of the game. Now, the rules are interesting. It basically says that if you are reported, you will receive a yellow card, and if you are reported for these instances, you will receive a red card. But it does leave the open basically for a controlling body to decide the time's off. In my opinion, if a player is reported, they get sent off for 5 minutes, receive a yellow card, and in that time, they cannot participate in the game, but their team will be able to play with 18 players on the ground. If a player receives a red card, they are out for the game for the rest of the entire game, and their team is down one player on the field, down to 17 for 10 minutes. Then a player would be able to come back onto the ground. This seems the fairest for me. If you have something that makes a bit more sense, please do let us know in the comments below. But I don't think I'm adding anything for the umpires, because it's basically saying if you report a player as per now, show them a yellow card. If you report them for these incidences, show them a red card. And 2 yellows will add up to a red, of course. The biggest thing I have regarding this rule is what it's called. Currently, when a behind is scored, a player needs to bring the football back into play. Now, this is an interesting verbiage, considering this rule has been changed many times, which basically doesn't require a kick anymore. This is usually referred to as a kick in or kick out, though personally I prefer the term kick off for 3 reasons. 1, that was the historical name. 2, the top of the goal square is still referred to in the rulebook as the kick-off line. And 3, and I'm being serious here, Bruce McAvaney used it once in the dying stages of the 2012 AFL Grand Final.
Sydney need to get this ball clear. They haven't been able to in their last kick-off. What do they do here?
And if Bruce used it, I think it's good enough for the rest of us. So let's call it the kick-off. And I want to call it the kick-off because in my view, you should have to kick the ball, preferably from within the goal square as well. So the old rules where you had to kick it from the goal square. But even then, I would be okay with players playing on out of the goal square. But I think requiring a kick, you're basically doing what the AFL has wanted to do with this particular rule. I would also reintroduce what happens if a player does something illegal from the kickoff, say kicks it out of bounds without being touched. That used to be a free kick as seen here in the 2005 AFL Grand Final.
Way to a premiership. 4 points at Subiaco, 3 at the SCG, and a scoring chance here off a horrible kick-in.
And if we do say you must kick the ball from within the goal square, that would also be illegal to bring it out any further. So that rule could be reintroduced. We could either say put the free kick at the top of the goal square, which is what the VFA did historically. We could, if that ball is kicked out of bounds, like we saw in the 2005 Grand Final, the mark would be placed where the ball went out of bounds. We could place it where the player who is standing on the mark stands right now. I would probably bring that forward back to where it was a few years ago, 10 metres from the kickoff line, rather than 15 or 5 as it was before 2018. Marking the ball is an important factor of the game, we know that. I used to be in favour of extending it to 20 metres. I'm not going to say that in this video, that is something we could always look at doing. For mine, the only real change I'd make to the marking rule at the present moment is that if the ball is touched off the boot, an umpire will, let's say Geelong GWS. Geelong is playing GWS. GWS player kicks it. Geelong player off the boot touches the ball. The umpire will call touched by Geelong, touched by Geelong. So if the ball is marked by a Geelong player, then it's play on. If it is touched or marked by a GWS player, this should still be considered mark. Because we have the idea, right, that if the ball is touched by an opposition player, it's not a mark. But often if it's touched by your own teammate, it is called touched play on. And I don't think that's necessarily particularly wrong, but what I will say is that if it is touched within a marking contest and someone brings it down, a mark should be awarded. I'm only saying touched play on in the situation where it's touched by a member of the opposing team and it's from a kick off the boot. In marking contest, I'm going to try and make it easy for the umpires by basically saying if someone comes down with it, pay it as a mark. A few sort of lesser ones. I'm not even sure if these all necessarily need to be in the rulebook, but I'm going to say them anyway. The 3 last ones. First and foremost, the AFL Review Centre, the ARC. The AFL had one goal for me, and that's all they needed to do in this off-season, was basically allow the ARC for when possible. If no review was asked for, but a error from a goal umpire was made, they should have the ability to press a button, which would set off some sort of alert in the stadium for everyone to stop play, communicate to the field umpire and the goal umpire that they're changing the score and that the ball clock will be reset, so they need to communicate with the timekeepers and reset play in the best manner possible. This is basically what the NHL does, and it will prevent the situation like we saw for the Port Adelaide Crows late in that game against the Sydney Swans. So from my perspective, this was the only thing the AFL needs to be done, and by all accounts they haven't done it. Chips in the ball and other things. I personally believe that infrared cameras a la hotspot in cricket is something that would desperately improve the quality of the ARC system, but as far as I'm concerned, the bare minimum that the ARC needs to do is have the ability to stop play. You could also look at, in the future, potentially overturning field umpiring decisions too, though I think that's probably still a little while off for now. I'm not personally in sports at all. I'll do a whole video on this later in the year. I'm not a big fan of the idea of coaches' challenges, captain challenges, because the moment you start limiting the amount of times teams can challenge umpiring decisions, whether that be by a number or by what they can challenge, you're inevitably going to come up with a situation where players or teams are out of challenges and a bad decision befalls them, or a bad decision befalls them on an area that they can't review. So I'm going to do a whole video on that at a later point, but at the bare minimum, the ARC should be able to intervene, stop play, and correct a goal umpiring error. We've only seen 3 games in AFL history go to extra time, but I'm very interested and looking forward to see what happens when we get our 4th, because unlike those previous 3, the halves will be 2 periods of 3 minutes, not 5. I believe this is too short. It should be 2 periods of 5 minutes. I do agree with the decision to remove the golden point. So what the rule basically is 2 periods of 3 minutes, If it's still tied, go again. Mine would be the same, but 2 periods of 5 minutes. I think longer, more substantial, fairer, gives more play, more football, which is what we want. Don't we want to see more football? I'm not a fan of introducing extra time to the regular season, even though I can see some merit in it. Given we have plenty of overlap already, we don't need any more. But that's basically all of that. Personally, I wouldn't actually mind seeing an AFL Grand Final replay again, though I doubt that will ever happen. This is a perfect way to end the video because it's going to segue very nicely into my next video that's coming out in a couple of days. The AFL has no policy regarding clash jumpers, at least none publicly. There was one leaked like 8-9 years ago now that is more or less what we can see with our own eyes, and I'll talk about that at the next video that's coming out in a few days. But I believe that the rules regarding jumpers should be placed into the rulebook. This is done for plenty of leagues around the world, the EPL, the NFL. There are plenty of organisations which put the rules regarding how the jumpers are to be made and what to do in the case of a clash in their rulebook. I believe the AFL could do absolutely the same thing, and I will discuss that more in my next video. Well, there we are. That's 18 proposed changes, a few with more substantially than the other, and actual requiring actual rewriting of the rulebook. Some do not. If you like some of these proposals, if they gave you some food for thought, please do let me know in the comments and liking the video, and feel free to subscribe to the channel. It costs absolutely nothing. I won't ever ask for any money or any sort of that. Just subscribe to the channel if you wish. That's more or less all I have. If you have, again, any ideas, anything you want to share, put it down below. Thank you very much for watching, and we will talk clash jumpers. I don't really see anyone wanting to watch that sort of video, but we're going to talk about it, at least I am, in the next video. Thank you very much for watching, Internet. See you then.